Well, we've seen a US intelligence report that was first reported on Bloomberg, warning of a major either missile or precision drone strike by Iran or one of its proxies against both military and government targets in Israel. That report was saying it's imminent, meaning that's going to happen in the coming days. As you mentioned, it's all in response to the Israeli attack on an Iranian consulate, which is also considered to be some kind of a Revolutionary Guards headquarters in the Syrian capital of Damascus. But that was the first of its kind. And Khomeini, the leader of Iran, did say that this is essentially an attack on Iranian soil. So Israel has responded initially just with comments from the foreign minister. We've seen Israel Katz tweeting on X. He said, if Iran attacks from its territory, Israel will respond and attack Iran. He wrote that in both Farsi and Hebrew. What we know from the ground is that since April the 1st, Israel's been bolstering its defenses and been on high alert for this precision drone strike. They've called up their entire aerial reservists from the army who are on leave. So all that unit is mobilized. Their embassies abroad are also on high alert. And something that I've just been noticing on the ground from Israeli citizens themselves, they're not really traveling at the moment to places like Dubai and especially Turkey. So there's really what they're looking out for is attack directly from Iran or from its proxies. Hezbollah on the northern border from Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, who have been performing and conducting attacks on the Red Sea and disrupting the sea route there. All of this, of course, kicking off since October the 7th, and the US vowing to stand behind Israel. We do know that Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken spoke last night. And Blinken reiterated his support and said that the US stands with Israel against any threat by Iran on its proxies. What we can say for sure is any strike on Israel would certainly widen the conflict and draw in the US and Iran and all its offshoots.
At every turn that they're not looking for a war, particularly with the United States. And now, as you mentioned earlier, that we've brought carrier groups into the region and I think sent a very strong message through all of our allies and really directly to the Iranians that we will retaliate on Israel's behalf if this gets out of hand. So I think that we're trying to deter Iran from taking the kind of steps that would really blow this conflict up. But again, it's just not really possible to control that outcome. So I think we're at a period of real danger here.
What Iran's foreign minister earlier this week, Foreign Minister Hossein, says that we've got to respond, and he seemed to blame the United States for giving Israel the green light for a strike on its building in Damascus, and they feel you guys are partly to blame. How seriously do you think the United States will take that?
Yeah, we're taking it very seriously in the sense that we have sent the message back to the Iranians, and this has been in the press, that we had nothing to do with it. In fact, we didn't even know the Israelis were going to do it until after it had happened. So this is not a raid that we wanted. I can tell you that I think the White House is pretty frustrated that Bibi would take that step when he did.
Do you think Benjamin Netanyahu, Frank, do you think Benjamin Netanyahu should have run it by the US before doing it?
Well, yes, of course I do, but I don't think there's any chance he was going to, because you don't ask questions that you know the answer is going to be no to. And I think Netanyahu's got his own political agenda that has nothing to do with the United States. In fact, countering the United States and defying the United States seems to be to his benefit politically, in his assessment anyway.
What do you make of the fact that tonight Iran's Lebanese ally Hezbollah announced that it has sent 40 rockets across the border into northern Israel?
Yeah, 40 rockets is just the beginning. Hezbollah has an arsenal of long-range precision missiles that are 1,000 times more powerful than what Hamas is ever able to muster. So they're sending a few rockets across the border now. That's the beginning. The question is, how much further are they going to go? Do they start sending missiles towards population centers in Israel? Or I think more likely they'll target military facilities and try not to kill anybody. If you remember, after the United States assassinated Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRGC, the Iranians responded by a rocket attack against a U.S. base in Iraq that didn't kill anybody. So that's the way they send a message without escalation. So I think they're probably trying to figure out now how to attack some targets within Israel that will send the message, but not kill so many Israelis as to necessitate a response by Israel and the United States.
Diplomacy is meaningless for the Iranian regime. And it makes the international dilemma right now because the global community faces the paradox of Iran violating international laws with impunity and launching terrorist attacks, which questioning the defensive response of Israel and the United States.
I want to start, Irfan, by considering the balance between deterrence and diplomacy, which I know you've written about. And where is that balance? Are we striking that balance right now? Is the US, is Israel striking that balance with Iran right now?
Personally, I believe it's much better that we look at the issue from the realistic point of view. About the military over diplomacy, personally, I believe right now for Iran, military is more important than diplomacy because Iran's foreign policy, while outwardly diplomacy, is driven by the military ambitions of the IRGC and Quds Force, with the foreign ministry acting as a cover for espionage effort. So diplomacy is meaningless for the Iranian regime. And it makes the international dilemma right now because the global community faces the paradox of Iran violating international laws with impunity and launching terrorist attacks, which questioning the defensive response of Israel and the United States. This is my personal view based on the realism in international relations that I told you.
Is that backed up, do you think, by the fact, it would seem, that Iran often talks aggressively about retaliation on Israel or towards Israel, but in reality, that either comes through proxies or doesn't materialize, it would seem, directly from Iran in any other way?
No decision has been made yet inside the hardcore of Iranian regime, and they are assessing what to do in completing foggy and unclear situation. However, on one hand, Khamenei has said something, and in other hand, a faction of the regime in Tehran, they seeks to preserve the regime's life and regime interest, and they don't want to jeopardize the future of the regime. Apparently, there is some communication between Iran and the United States, specifically with the Democrat president in the White House, and probably a kind of limited and defined response within a specific framework is expected. But 2 points is important here for the European countries. This regime is unstable, you know much better than me, because of the economy, internal situation, and the lacks of stability, and it's facing a crisis. That is not necessary to mention all of them. And in outdated regime that doesn't belong to this era, so surely it will collapse sooner or later, this century or next one.
This is what both the Israelis and the Iranians have sort of described for many years as the shadow war that's ongoing between them. We've seen over the past 6 months, the Houthis in Yemen, an Iranian-backed group, they have attacked a number of ships that they say have links to Israel. Some do, many don't. In the Red Sea and going through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. That hasn't drawn any sort of response from Israel. And I don't think this is going to either. I think we're all still waiting to see, and the Israelis are waiting to see how far the Iranians go, whether they, as some hardliners in Tehran have suggested, carry out a direct attack on Israel, whether they choose to attack via their proxies. I think the full scope of what they do will determine what Israel does or does not do in response.
Yeah, I mean, so far, I mean, despite the escalating rhetoric, Greg, no move by the Iranians. And let's recall what the supreme leader said earlier this week. He said Israel was an evil regime and it must be punished, and it shall be. Do you think they haven't done anything yet because of those warnings, very clear warnings from Washington and Tel Aviv, and all the behind-the-scenes arm twisting, you know, including by Britain? Or is it because they're really not sure what to strike?
I think it's a mix of both. I think they aren't sure what they want to do. They have several options, one of them being a direct attack, a missile or drone attack on Israel, another one being attacking via their proxies in the region, groups in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, all of which have attacked Israel over the past 6 months. Or they could also strike at Israeli interests abroad. They could attack Israeli embassies, for example. There's been a concern around that, and it's something the Iranians have done before, and Israel has closed some of its foreign embassies over the past 2 weeks because of those fears. So the Iranians are weighing these options, and I think they're trying to figure out what they can do that won't elicit a retaliatory strike from Israel or perhaps even from the United States or Western powers. They don't want to do something that is going to bring the conflict directly to Iran. That's something they have tried to avoid for many, many years, which is why they have cultivated this network of proxies around the regions.
Iran gave an overwhelming response, over 200 rockets, drones, ballistic missiles. So there was no hesitation. They didn't make it small. They wanted to send a strong signal that what was done in Syria is unacceptable, to hit a diplomatic facility and to kill senior Iranian officials had to be responded to in an overwhelming way. So that was done. But the reality is that the damage done to Israel has been minimal so far as casualties are concerned, as far as physical damage. And so this, I believe, was a very careful decision by the Iranians to satisfy their domestic audience, to send a strong message to Israel, but not to require yet another escalation in the response. I believe that the Israelis are hearing strongly from the United States that they must be very careful in how they respond to this. We have to keep in mind that the Israelis did not tell the United States before they carried out the strike in Syria, and they did not have the United States green light or agreement to carry out that strike in Syria. This escalation very much has the ability to draw the United States in, which is not something President Biden wants.
For some time now, we have seen Benjamin Netanyahu very much under pressure from Western allies, including the United States, its lead supporter. And this attack by Iran, I think, has actually shown overnight all those allies who had been criticising Netanyahu. The Australian government's a really good example. It's been saying in all its messaging, the Netanyahu government must do this, the Netanyahu government must do that. We disagree with the Netanyahu government on X, Y, and Z. And so you are now seeing, I think, a bit of a reversal or a scaling back of that, because this will generate enormous sympathy for Israel. We know that Iran's stated goal is to wipe Israel from the map. You see a massive attack launched at it, and you see the allies coming to help, particularly France, Britain, and the United States. So overall, where we land, I think, is in a better, slightly better position for Netanyahu himself politically.
That's interesting as well. Peter, so there's that point from Latika, Netanyahu's political position, domestically perhaps. Also globally, is this about whether he can be restrained at this point in some way?
Well, it would suit him, certainly, to have some sort of retaliatory strike against Iran. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens necessarily, but he's holding a very fragile coalition at the moment. We have Benny Gantz, who's probably the favourite, I would imagine, to be the next Israeli Prime Minister. It'll be really interesting to see what he has to say on this. I note that Victoria Atkins, the Health Secretary, has confirmed to Sky News in the last few minutes that our fighter jets, British fighter jets, have been involved with this. So the international coalition is fascinating, especially the points Chloe was making a bit earlier on with Michael Binion in regard to Jordan and Saudi Arabia as well. So there is a lot of support for Israel with this. Certainly we've seen that waning since the 7th of October, given the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza, the number of innocent civilians who have been killed there. And Netanyahu has been in a very difficult position. Lots of calls from his own people for an election as soon as possible, even in a state of war, which is basically unprecedented.
We defeated them. We destroyed not only us, we were assisted by the United States, by Great Britain, by France, by some other countries. It was an exceptional event, an unbelievable event, where we destroyed 300 UAVs and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. They were all intercepted. What else do we need to do? They are humiliated. They are defeated. They threatened Israel with a comprehensive missile attack, and they achieved nothing. Why do we have to react?
So would you say, do you think Netanyahu will listen to that argument? Do you think there won't be a military response from Israel?
Tell me, did you know that Netanyahu listened to anything sound in the last few years? That he will now do something entirely different from his habits? I doubt very much that he will listen to it. I think that he will listen to what his political allies and partners, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, are saying. They say that Saturday night was a strategic failure for Israel. They fail to remember that the United States of America and Great Britain and France and other countries were involved with us. For them, it's a strategic failure. It was a tactical success, technically, pointedly, but that it was a strategic failure, and that we need to react immediately with all the power that we possess and so on. And I'm afraid that Netanyahu listens to them. So I don't know, but I hope that it will never happen.
And what could that be? I mean, could that be Israel sending its own missiles into Iran?
I'll tell you two things. Number one, I don't know. So when I don't know, I don't say.
Okay, fair
Number
enough.
two, even if I knew, I wouldn't be able to share it with you for obvious reasons. Listen, I'm a critic of the Israeli government and of the Israeli prime minister, but I'm not an informer of the international media of what military operations might be. But I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know what they think. I can't read them. They are strange people. They are irresponsible. They are reckless. They are dangerous. They are dangerous for us, first and foremost. There is no question that Iran has done something which will have to be carefully analyzed. And we will have, all of us, all of the responsible, serious powers, first of all, America, together with the European partners, again, Great Britain, France, Germany, and Israel also, and the potential partners in the moderate Arab countries, will have to think seriously to analyze the possible ramification of the formal, open the declaration of war by Iran and the shooting of hundreds of missiles and UAVs and whatnot. And we'll have to deal with it. Iran is the bad side of this story. It will have to be dealt with. But we have to be very careful and and take time. And there is no rush for anything. It's not something, Israel didn't suffer from this. In fact, I think that the reputation of the Israeli army, the Israeli technology, the synchronization of all these different types of anti-air defenses was absolutely outstanding. I can tell you, as someone who decided to build the Iron Dome, we used the Iron Dome. We used the David Sting, which also my government was privileged to decide on building it, and the Arrow, and all of these weapons were used in a not too large air area with hundreds of planes in the air, and they have intercepted all these missiles. This is just unbelievable.
The Iranians sent a large quantity, a large number of very inexpensive and old Iranian drones 3 hours earlier and announced it. And the Israelis and the Americans and the British and the French all went out and used their most expensive and most modern technology to down those drones. Iran knew those drones were going to be downed anyway, but they were decoys, and they were to make the Israelis and their allies in genocide to use up all their new technology and also to expose their capabilities and the capabilities of those technologies to Iran, whereas Iran didn't use any of its new drones. On the other hand, there are two series of missiles used by Iran, a large number of old models of older missiles that also are inexpensive and do not hold any newer technology for the Iranians to expose. Those were also fired, and again, they were decoys. So the Western allies of Israel, they used up their capabilities.
Right.
And then Iran fired a handful of more advanced, not its most advanced, but more advanced missiles, about 10, between 10 to 20, and they went right through the shield and struck targets in the south and in the north.
Okay, so on that, Israel says that direct hit caused light damage at the base. This is the Nevatim Air Force Base in southern Israel, was still functioning. Just to put their point of view there. So is your point that this was just to make the defenders, the allies of Israel, waste expensive weaponry?
No, it's not only that. It was also to expose whatever capabilities exist. And that would be very useful for Iran if there is a serious exchange. Because if Iran wants to carry out a major strike on the Israeli regime, the attack would be tenfold. Iran has large numbers of underground drone bases and large numbers of underground missile bases across the country. They've been preparing because the United States has for decades been saying all options are on the table. So they've been preparing themselves with high-tech but inexpensive weapons to deal with high-tech and very expensive weapons.
Right.
What the Iran attack shows is just what a threat they are in the region. I mean, this is a country that backs Hamas, that backs Hezbollah in Lebanon, that backs the Houthis in the Red Sea, and now we see it carrying out a state-on-state attack for the first time, directly onto the state of Israel. And that's why one can feel every sympathy. I mean, Israeli people this morning thinking we've suffered this massive attack. Of course, we want our government to respond. And that's why I think, we have to be sensitive in the way we put this, but to say, look, you have had a win because the Iran attack was such a failure. And the smart thing to do, as well as the tough thing to do now, is actually not to escalate. But really what the world should be doing today is pointing at Hamas and saying, right, the Israelis have offered you a deal on hostage release. It's a very generous deal, which gives you both a stop in the fighting and also the release of a large number of prisoners. Why aren't you taking that deal? The people that are standing in the way of a stop in the fighting in Gaza are clearly Hamas, and let the attention be on that and on the malign influence of Iran rather than on escalation.
Okay, I'll try to come back to that in a second, Hamas and Gaza. But was it right to ally ourselves so strongly with Israel to defend them from drone attacks, but when we have not done that in the case of Ukraine? We have many people getting in touch with us this morning, Lord Cameron, saying that why is it right in one set of circumstances but not in another?
Well, we've done a huge amount to help Ukraine with its defence. We've trained 60,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We were the first to give anti-tank weapons, the first to give long-range artillery, the first to give tanks, the first to give long-range weapons. And the Ukrainians, whenever you go there, whenever you talk to them, they single out Britain as the country that's done more than anyone else to defend them.
But it's still a different level of support, isn't it?
Well, it's a different situation. I think that's the point. And we have to respond to each situation on its merits and in the right way. But we've given far more to Ukraine for its defense than we have, than others have done, and also than we have to Israel. So I think it is the right thing to do. Look, in this case, we were asked by the Americans to backfill their operation. That released more of their planes to help over the skies of Israel. And I think that was obviously the right thing to do.
I don't think we should be pulling Israel back and warning them not to retaliate militarily. I think if Iran pays no military costs, especially in that IRGC infrastructure, maybe even the nuclear program, they have learned a lesson that they can escalate to this extent, and this becomes the new baseline for further escalation. And again, these aren't nuclear-tipped missiles yet. These aren't missiles that can reach Britain or the United States yet, but one day they might be if Iran internalizes a lesson that there really is no threshold that they can cross that will actually force the West to act. So there has to be a military action, likely by Israel, but also there has to be political and economic steps, and that's where the United Kingdom actually can play a major role. One of the E3 countries, participants still in the Iran nuclear deal, refusing to trigger the snapback of UN sanctions on Iran. There is no reason to delay that any further. That should be something that's worked on, led by Prime Minister Sunak tomorrow. Work with France, Germany, United States, snap back those sanctions from the United Nations. Why are we still dragging our feet on IRGC prescription? Let's just get it done. The IRGC is behind this, so why were we delaying that anymore?
I mean, the great fear here is escalation, isn't it? That's the word. That's the word that is being used. If Israel go back hard militarily, if the world, I suppose, goes hard economically or in other methods, then the argument is this escalates out of control. We end up with World War III. That's the fear, I suppose, that people have.
My answer to that is look at what the current policy of accommodation, appeasement, whatever you want to call it, has led to. Over the last 6 months alone, we don't have to go back through the 40-plus years of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Let's just go back through the last 6 months of a 7-front war they have been waging against Israel. Nonstop missile, rocket, drone attacks out of southern Lebanon is a new normal now. We just accept that there is a massive amount of warfare going on out of southern Lebanon into Israel, and towns across northern Israel have been evacuated. New normal. Houthis, another client, another proxy of Iran, launching ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones into maritime shipping, into British-owned tankers or vessels, container ships, against the British Navy, against the U.S. Navy, others, nonstop. We now have accepted that as normal. We're just going to play defense against that. No cost for Iran. And now they have taken their escalation step. They just launched 120 ballistic missiles. I don't think everybody listening understands what a ballistic missile is. This is not a tiny homemade rocket like you're used to hearing about Hamas firing for years out of Gaza. This is a weapon that is intended to inflict a lot of damage. Firing 120 of them within an hour, plus 30 cruise missiles, plus 170 suicide drones. That is massive warfare of a scale that is unprecedented. So the idea that we shouldn't act for fear of escalation, my goodness, now we have a new baseline that Iran is starting from. Where do you think this goes to next, other than crossing the nuclear threshold and becoming a nuclear armed threat as well?